welcome you this afternoon to the Village of Pinehurst Planning and Zoning Board special meeting work session this afternoon. My name is Jeremy Hooper. I will chair the meeting. I'll point out that we do have 6 board members with us this afternoon, as well as 4 staff members for the work session. Maria Carpenter, Alfred Cassidy, Alex Cameron's with us, and Kathy Lyles. So welcome, everyone. We're going to have a discussion in a work session where we're going to address the Village Place form-based code. And with that, I'll ask who's leading it from staff. That discussion. Is he on his way that I start? I started a little early here for Alex to run in the room. Alex, welcome. We jumped the gun a little bit. We're excited. We've handled it all. Welcome, Alex.
All right. First of all, thanks for such a good representation of the board on an off meeting date. I hope over the course of the next 5 weeks we see a little bit more of each other. I'm very impressed with, at least initially, the scheduling you guys are making yourselves available, at least, or whatever assemblage that you guys are able to come together. Just to kind of give a little bit more background on some of the correspondence and communication that we've had. We've set a schedule now for pretty much the rest of this month up to our regular scheduled meeting in April. And we worked back from a couple of important dates. One, March 30th, we're going to schedule a special meeting and hopefully a special public hearing, where out of that meeting that we hope that we get a formal recommendation from the Planning and Zoning Board after conclusion of that public hearing to Village Council on the work that we've done with the form-based code and a formal recommendation on the small area plan for Village Place. And the next very important date, the April 6th regular scheduled meeting, we hope to bring to you guys and hold a public hearing where we will consider amendments to the Pinehurst Development Ordinance and the official zoning map in order to implement the form-based code and the small area plan vision for hopefully both of Village Place and Pinehurst South. So a lot of what we do between now and then is going to really dictate what that's going to look like, or if we can meet that deadline, which again, I think we've got enough meetings. I think a total of 6 special meetings, including this one between now and April, or I may have missed one. A couple of them are back-to-back dates, which I think will be very beneficial because we should be able to pick right back up from where the discussion left the day before. Also, a couple of meetings where we're able to start a little bit earlier so we don't wane too much heading into the evening or the twilight hour. So the charge, or what's expected, and what we're going to work with you guys on, is get a recommendation first on the Village Place form-based code, and then the implementation aspect, so the final opportunity, or the first opportunity and the final action recommendation on how we're going to make this work within our current regulatory framework. So I think that's something a lot of us have been desiring to see, and myself included, and that'll give us an ability to move forward with this work that we've been on and working on for well over 2 years as a community, and can lift a moratorium, and we'll be able to reevaluate a year or two later. So with that, we have circulated, you guys have seen sort of what the final draft of the Village Place form-based code has been. We've had a couple of work sessions on that topic. We've gotten some feedback from the board, and again, all the sections have been kind of pieced together, and a lot of thanks to Darren for doing the bulk of that work. We hope that we have an ability today to discuss, as I put out in my communication, anything that's totally objectionable that we can't live without, with a special attention for this point to look through the architectural standards, I believe, that are in section 5. Obviously, the first time we looked at that, I think we all were a little overwhelmed with some of those standards, something very different than what we've ever really dealt with here within the village, even takes the historic district standards to another level, even if you look at that. So we know we've gotten some feedback and some comments that have been sent to us, and we're appreciative for those. Staff has had the opportunity to kind of go through some of those comments this afternoon. With that, we'll be able to pull the document up on the screen, and Chair, if you'd like, we can go section by section, and then have an opportunity for each board members, if they have any questions or concerns on those sections, we can discuss.
Thank you, Alex. I think that's a good approach.
All right, again, and I'm going to remind the board that, you know, with the approach that we're going to take, sort of with the conditional zoning aspect to implement these requirements, that's going to allow for a little more latitude and some flexibility with what you see. I would think, again, the bulk of the discussion, really, the regulating plan is where really sets forth the building types or the uses, block by block. We've had extensive communication over the regulating plan and come to a consensus several months ago. We've also paired through a use table with that, which you'll see with, we start talking about the PDO updates. So this should be just a review for everyone. I know Jack had shared a comment about a portion of, it's very hard to tell from here, but I believe that's Block L, so that it matches up with the village-owned parcel here, so that the remainder of that would show the same as the public conservation shading here. That's an easy adjustment we'll be able to make.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
So if you look at the parcel line, it's kind of, a little bit right here, just past where you see that structures, that's the one-story apartment complex there, just matching it up with that parcel.
In particular, since that's being talked about as a potential location. Okay.
Anything else? No? Okay. Lot standards. Okay, so now we're getting into some of our dimensional requirements.
Yeah, one quick question on the regulating plan. Previously, we showed the small area plan boundary on that plan. Was that not on there intentionally? Does it benefit to have it on there? It was its own layer, a dashed red, because we commented about where it was.
Yeah, we've kind of altered that a little bit. That's something we can easily snap back on if we need to.
Well, everything in color is part of it, and is that right?
Yeah, but not quite, yeah. We have changed the boundary. I think we moved a section, like these blocks here are in the boundary itself, but the regulating plan doesn't address.
Right.
Good catch.
Wouldn't hurt. I know a guy who's a whiz with GIS who'll be glad to help us. Okay. Back to the lot standards. All right. So there's been a lot of discussion on, is live work redundant with mixed use?
Can we, if you're going to go in sequence, I had a comment on lot types that it ought to have the code that's used in the regulating plan
4, 5,
for
6.
those. Okay. You know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, just so it references the same keynote that you have on the regulating plan.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. I mean, so far it's just, we're discussing some very minor editorial changes that can really help the functionality of the document. So this is good.
To be clear also, are we utilizing or implementing some of Jack's comments into our discussion as you kind of go along? It's kind of, as he mentioned,
Yeah.
in sequence.
And-
That's just to be clear.
And not to single out Jack's comments.
Sure,
but
no, it's okay.
But we just have something that Jack was able to circulate to us, so we can speak to those. Other than that, the other members are just going to need to,
I wanted to make sure
jump in.
everybody knew what we were doing, and I wanted to request that as well, is make sure that we're including any comments, not only from Jack, but anybody from the board, kind of as we hit that topic, as we go down the list. I think that would be most helpful.
and I think there's going to be some that Jack has raised here that you guys are going to need to discuss and
Sure.
see what's the best recommendation going forward.
Yeah, I'm not adamant and in love with everything I've said, but I'll go with the majority.
Pretty in-depth.
It may change. Okay, well, absent anyone jumping in here, let's go to one of the next topics here. And I don't know if it's just me, but that screen is awful blurry.
Hey, Alex, you were saying something, and maybe you finished it, but the live work / mixed use, that is the same?
Yeah, so
Okay.
So we had this discussion with the Pinehurst South form-based code. We've had this discussion at council too. They're essentially the same if we can remove the redundancy, if it just causes a lot of, the intent is, the live work is more, has the appearance of like a townhome, smaller scale. But if we're just talking about the separation of the uses and the types of uses, the range of uses within them,
It adds bulk with little value.
It does, but we're not saying that all mixed use allows residential, are we?
that's right. It doesn't mean that it has to be residential on the second floor or third floor potentially. It's just that it allows for the opportunity.
In the office district, down, may not have residential, but that's fine. This makes more sense than having to go through all that.
All right, one of the comments that Jack's raised to us is the parking stall dimensions. And I think we've got an ability to provide some clarity on that. And I don't think that I'm on the right page. I don't know why it's doing that. Which page is that? Villa front loaded.
The only thing I was trying to point out that is that parking stalls, the length seems to be less adequate all the time based upon the vehicles that are now being parked throughout the village,
20 feet might be about right, but do you think it needs to be longer?
except that the most
There we go.
popular car sold in America is an F-150, which is 21 feet long.
So, yeah, we were able to do a little bit of research on like some of the larger size vehicles. So there may be just a mix-up in what the diagram's showing versus what the actual requirement is. So we've got a 20-foot build-to line, right? So that's going to give you 20 feet, and then the attached garage has to be a minimum of 6 feet back from that front facade. So in actuality, instead of it being 18 feet in length, you're really going to be anywhere between 20 to 26 plus.
For that example, that's fine, I understand. But there's other mentions of the 20-foot parking situation that ought to be looked at.
Right, so if you look at the integral parking and the rear parking off the alley, then you are looking at a 20-foot.
One of them says 18 feet, I forget where exactly.
Let's see, which one do we have that's 18?
It's in the villa lots.
Skipping it?
Well, I think you can look at it. I think it just bears some analysis as to whether or not that's adequate.
I don't think 18's adequate. No.
I mean, it says, there's a minimum dimension there of 18 right here as well. But if you look at the build-to line is 20. It's going to be 20 to 26 feet. So we could just make sure that it says it's consistent with that. We can make it 20 feet. I mean,
Which one?
by the way, kudos to Jack for knowing the length of an F-150.
Yep.
Apparently a Tahoe is
17 and a half?
211
11
inches.
inches.
Yeah.
Now, I will mention that a F-250 with an 8-foot bed gets into the 23-foot section. I've had one.
And a hitch.
Yes, and a hitch.
Okay, Matt, we haven't heard from you.
And one of the comments we were talking about, and I want to make sure that I'm not mistaking here, when we were talking about the length of the parking, there was also a comment somewhere that says the minimum of 6 feet or under. Did I misread that somewhere where parking could not be allowed? I'll find that.
Thinking about, let me find it real
I'll
quick.
get some clarity on that.
Those are 6 feet back from the facade of the primary.
For
Yeah,
the
you do have them.
General provisions.
The parking setback is, look at the
Yep.
first paragraph under the dimensionals.
General provisions.
Is that where you're looking?
Driveway shall be either less than 6 feet in length, not allowing vehicles to park in the driveway, or 20 feet
Okay.
in length.
I know which one he's
Is there any
talking
clarity on the why it would be?
What page you on?
about.
10?
It just seems to be a funny statement. I don't know if we've discussed that before. Driveway shall be either less than 6 foot. So I'm curious of why we would want a driveway less than 6 foot where a vehicle could not then park on it.
The goal with these structures is to push that parking to the rear, okay? And so by allowing the additional space at the front, and correct me if I'm wrong, Alex, I think the goal was to provide an opportunity, maybe for deliveries or things of that nature, so people, if they needed to pop off and pick somebody up, or they needed a small space but not a parking
Okay.
space, it provided room for that.
Okay, so that's kind of the idea. So it could be a paved parking spot, or it could be gravel or whatever is allowed. Could pull off either for a mail delivery, something to that nature. Okay, all right.
If you kind of think of that, so you're pulling out of your garage, right?
Yeah,
Can't see through normal walls, okay? And you're going to be entering a public road, and you're not going to be able to clear right and left. I mean, I've had people in my house who kind of start out the garage without opening the garage door, so I can see where, I don't want to get into a safety aspect, but if you can't get your vehicle out to look right and left, especially when you look at some of these templated things, there's sidewalks and there's, public streets. So you may want to push the garage back to give you at least enough clearance to clear your right and left before you proceed onto the road.
20-foot driveway, then you're more likely, you're
Push these
backing
in.
out. There's nowhere to probably turn on our
That's
width
tight
of
as
lots.
right.
We're talking about
Right.
34 feet here.
The presumption here, yeah, is just that there's going to be such low volume, it's
You
not
have to
an
get
issue,
at
but
least
you
your
could have an
body out to
issue.
where you can turn your head right and left to clear your sidewalk and just
typical garage being 24
But,
feet
I
on the
mean, we've all
inside.
seen developments where the garage
Instead of a 4-foot
is 2 feet
minimum.
off the driveway. You know, you just don't want any, you know, people with a walker behind you when you go do that. They may not be able to move fast enough.
No, that's a very good point. And
So what if we move
there's
those,
an
that
option.
rear parking up, where they're parking, like where you have the detached parking, where it says 4-foot minimum rear garage setback, would you be comfortable with something like 10? Would that give you enough space? Because we're working within a limited amount of depth.
Gives you more reaction time, that's for sure.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm
it's
sure there's
only-
a standard that, you know, some engineers come up with to say this is the optimum.
Architects, that's what
Okay, everybody looks at Matt.
Now you've woken them up.
This is an only issue for front-loaded lots, is that correct?
It should just be for those where we're showing the rear loading lots, which again, that bullet point should be a little bit clearer. So, yeah. The only thing we will have to do a little bit greater analysis, when you're talking about, you know, a 22-foot wide lot or 34-foot wide lot, the minimum depth, you know, not a great depth, and if you're pushing that up, just to make sure there's still enough envelope there. But
Oh, yeah.
if you're backing out and you're starting to get almost to the travel lane, and you're not yet clear of the driver's side, looking left or
On
right.
all of our landscape design saying we're putting tree lined, right? It's hard to look through a tree sometimes, you know, in tree, I guess.
Drove around
Well,
the
and I
village
think
of
that
Pinehurst.
what I've seen since.
Look at the effects on Midland Road, right? Can't
What I've
drive
seen
through
since
those
the
trees either.
implementation of our vegetative buffer that we have is a lot of times to meet the requirement, it is a corner tree that's left. To your point, if we get into the narrower lots, then we're leaving a corner tree to qualify for our measurements. I don't know. We did have a discussion also at that point in time of how close the tree could be to the driveway.
Something to think about, I guess.
Yeah, not just trees, but
Yeah, that's right,
shrubs.
it can be any-
Shrubs as
Very
well.
worse
yeah.
than trees.
Next.
Yeah, so we feel good about the 10-foot is where I'm going, we can move on to the
Oh, yeah, I
next
mean,
one. Is that right? Yeah.
that's a requirement now.
Okay, is it a requirement now?
Yeah,
Okay.
for a detached. Now, again, they don't have to be detached, but this is given an allowance that if it were detached, then it could be, within 6 feet there, so.
Yeah.
Make a final decision on the size of the parking? 23 is what we're going with?
Well, I think we're going to make it consistent that at least be a minimum of 20, but it could likely be, if it is attached in the villa lots, then if a garage is attached with the villa lots, it's going to have to be pushed back from that front facade an additional 6 feet. So if you have a 20-foot minimum, and then you have a integral garage that's detached 6 more feet, then it's going to be up to 26 feet, in all likelihood.
Okay. Does that satisfy everybody? Just move forward with that? Is it, okay.
While we're kind of talking about the build-to line, you'll see throughout the document that a lot of that, the current standard in the document is that a minimum of 75% of the facade be at the build-to line. I think that could warrant some discussion with the board.
Stayed on Jack's notes, and of course, we've had the conversation before with this board. I thought we had settled it, but I'm guessing we did it, and I think my concern, of course, when we talk about a build-to line and then no encroachment past that other than 2 foot with a porch, it could get pretty difficult. And so the 75% of the structure doesn't allow for, you know, the porch to be kind of built in and maybe set back coming out of the house, if that's what we're looking for.
Well, I was less concerned about that than, I've lived in townhomes that are like 3 units together, for example, and they tend to, the facades are at different depths from the street or the sidewalk, and it gives it more texture. If we're going to demand 75% of a townhome, that's a 3-unit home, 75%'s got to be at the same build-to line. I think we restrict the architectural ability in that particular case.
And so if we move it to 50%, then that's not saying that at least 50% has to be. What it does, but it gives that little bit more flexibility. So it's not going to dictate that it actually happened, but it just gives that opportunity, whereas saying then the most you can be flexible with is 25%, which is going to be, what, anywhere from 6 to 12 feet of a structure, based
And
on the lot standards.
Multifamily, you know, with townhomes attached, that's, really doesn't seem to make sense. I think 50% would be okay. That allows for some variety of the front facades, setbacks from each other.
It allows the architects to have some flexibility there.
Some of my concern.
Get a head nod, just if we can, on that one topic. I mean, 50%, folks?
So some of my concern with that also is if we get into the single-family houses that are detached, we also still have our build-to line. If we get into the scenario of discussing topography and the grading, I just, my thoughts and application are, if we can extend that porch out past 2 foot, past the build-to line, that it could affect how builder grades the lot a little bit, for those steps to not be as many steps or that type of nature. And I just want to make it easier on those guys instead of a little bit harder. And what's our big holdback on not allowing more than 2 foot encroaching past that build-to lot with really steps and a porch? Just consistency, or?
Well, the porch would provide mass, so I think, I mean, could provide mass. So if you start pushing a porch structure very far forward, then I think it could affect how that setback is perceived. I think with the steps or maybe a landing, you know, that's maybe not as much of an appearance issue
Okay.
as if you tried to do the porch.
Porch is still under roof, and we have,
Okay.
you know, we have allowances now for steps too, that they're able to encroach. So the steps would be able to go another 3 to 5 feet potentially, on top of that 2 foot.
That provides for a lot of option.
And two, you know, keep in mind, if you've got we'll just use the manor lot here that's on the screen. Here's your build-to line. You could still have, you know, a lot of this area in porch, because that would still be considered part of the building.
Got it, yep.
And then you can go an additional 2 feet into that setback if it were just for a porch.
Okay, so we're just so for this application, when we mention porch, we're talking about it being covered part of the porch, not necessarily the steps themselves. So the steps with hand railing could then encroach beyond. We just wouldn't be able to have the landing or a covered landing.
You know, to typically think of anything that's either roof, partially walled, or has some sort of foundation.
Okay, and then, of course, if we went to 50%, then I think that's, with that point, and then going to 50%, it probably settles it and takes care of it, so.
I needed a clarification on the 50%, because when we were talking about the 50%, we were kind of looking at the single-family attached. Did you mean to go to 50%? I just want to clarify for all
No, I think,
lot
well, I
types.
particularly think the single-family attached
Okay.
is where it comes into play, and that was my concern. I don't know about other comments, to tell you the truth.
Across the board, single-family attached.
Single-family attached gives it more texture, and that's where the 50% should be
Okay, thank
clearly.
Good. Well, there again, what it does is it allows for more flexibility. Will it be half of the structure? Probably not, but you're not limited by just that 25%. So it could be 30, whatever, anywhere in between.
So as a board, we would just want to make only the single-family attached, then the 50%, and leave everything else 75%
For the detached.
for the detached.
What about the commercial mixed use?
Yeah.
I think the facades are well-designed there.
That mean we can move to section 3?
Let me clear this up in my mind. Are we saying that the rear loaded lots for manor or whatever, have to have an alley or parking behind? I mean, you know, it could be that it's on a minor street, a major street and a minor street. Lot goes the full length. Do they have to create an alley or?
That really goes back to the small area plan, doesn't it? I mean, the small area
I don't
plan
know, it just
was
says it
rather
here, so I don't want anybody.
firm about the use of alleys.
Yeah, it,
Call.
it's definitely recommended, and two, I don't want to lose too much of my place here. But if you go back to the regulating plan, which I don't know if that's Pinehurst South or that's Village Place that Matt has right out in front of him, which is smart, because I said I was going to tab mine, because that's what we need to keep going back to, was the regulating plan. So if you look at the regulating plan for these type of uses, we're showing those to be solely at the Old Tradition site, just down the hill here, across from the brewery area, which in likelihood is, you know, with that activated frontage and those areas there, we're going to have them push and have them rear loaded and accessed by alleys. And then the only other area is that section over here near Board Branch. So those are the only two areas where we're going to have these type of, what the regulating plan calls for, these type of uses.
Like that word parking back there, but that's okay. No, the alley, are they 10-foot alleys? And so,
That's a good segue into the next section.
Next conversation.
Thank you, Louise.
Wider than as-built. Slightly wider than as-built out there right
Oh,
now.
just slightly, yeah.
Okay, question, before we go to section 3. On the single-family detached, there's a dimension that says 18-foot minimum on the left side, and it,
Go into the right-of-way.
yeah, from
Yeah,
the side, from the sidewalk to the front of the garage. And then there's a 20-foot minimum from the right-of-way to the edge of the structure or the build-to line.
So the 18-foot dimension call-out is actually deeper than the 20-foot dimension. We noticed that earlier. We're going to have to, we'll correct that.
Okay.
Hey, Matt, this is your time to shine here, too, with the street design.
Section 3, correct?
Yes.
We had a good work session on this topic a handful of months or so ago. Of course, a lot of talk about travel lane dimensions. As things have changed, I know one example Jack used was we have a lot of deliveries these days now, a little bit more so than maybe we did 3 or 4 years ago. Keep in mind that all the travel lanes are going to have to meet the emergency services requirement, so you know, you got to think of ambulatory services, fire trucks where applicable, so that's kind of going to be the standard, the minimum standard that's going to have to be met regardless, where required, of course.
In this section, street section, typical alley, on page 27, this is where it specifies the 18-foot minimum stall length, head-in perpendicular, which at a minimum, that's got to be revised up slightly. Don't you think so? Yeah, that's what we agree. Okay, well,
it should carry through the whole.
talking about
Third paragraph.
third paragraph.
18-foot minimum of stall length, is that the point?
when we looked at this section before, we talked about golf cart parking, and since he's gone, I can say this, but Darren said that he was going to look at specific golf cart parking consideration. That's something we still want to, I mean, maybe in our current window, not consider, but something for future revisions.
I think we definitely need to consider it.
Well, it-
Because we don't have a standard now,
Right.
even, we allow for alternate space, including golf cart, but, and I know we've looked at this for reviews for other non-residential development when there's trying to find a standard. And I believe we actually reached out to one of your colleagues to see if there is some sort of national standard for what should that stall dimension be.
If I'm incorrect, tell me if I'm incorrect, one of our points was that we didn't have anything at all really pertaining to golf cart parking, other than really just a picture there, and we thought that it should be included a little bit more thoroughly throughout our, our plan in general, and specifically the parking and the streets. So I'm not sure if we ever really addressed that.
And,
after we had that
and two,
conversation.
it's likely a topic that needs to be addressed a little more holistically throughout the village and not just
Sure.
in the Village Place or the Pinehurst South area. And so we're gonna see a couple of comments have been raised in discussions with council as well about, such things like relocation of utilities underground where we can. Again, that's something we need to tackle, throughout our planning limits, not just in these areas, but that helpful reminder.
But I think some standards would be important to go ahead and implement into this.
Minimum standards.
Minimum standards, yes.
Not that parking would ever be an issue, but when you kind of look at, the figure on 3.2, the complete street, consideration of, if the space is available, do you want to consider diagonal parking? Which you're going to be able to load twice the vehicle, especially in the areas that are close to the, whether, the center park, as you experience events that may increase the number of cars by 2 or 3 times.
Did we ever consider angle parking? I don't
Yeah,
know.
diagonal parking or angle parking in there, yeah. That's what I,
This can radically change the design of the streets and
kind of see it happening in Southern Pines. They're kind of creating spaces, where there really isn't space, but they went to a diagonal versus a parallel with the road.
Kind of going back to that utilities portion of that, so I think some of the limitation is opportunity to implement some of these, right? Due to some of our streets having the electrical lines and the poles still there would hinder us from even widening that street at all before we even get into side street parking. I think the implementation of it is something that was of a concern, right? I mean,
Is there ample space?
widen at all and implement some of our street designs that are in here on some of the streets that maybe we're talking about.
I mean, the impediment is that the physical condition is that they're there, but as the redevelopment comes, we'll have that ability to, regulate that or require that, especially in the new areas, anywhere there's, either it's vacant or there's going to be a completely demolition and redo and utilities have to be extended and all that, they're going to be required to be placed there. Up and down Rattlesnake obviously is, especially on that one side, it's an impediment. But it's not that it can't be done. It's just when and if it happens.
Yeah.
So a developer could come into you with a design that would show angled parking, and it,
I don't think there's anything in here that specifically states that you have to do parallel parking. I think that's kind of where you're going.
Okay.
It just says if you're going to do parallel parking, then you have to follow the engineering standards.
well, I don't quite agree with that. I think the small area plan and this document never contemplates angled parking anywhere.
Right.
And I think that architecturally, it's been said quite often that angled parking changes the streetscape dramatically. You cannot really view the retail and office space along a street compared to parallel parking. So architecturally, I think the architects were very clear in not specifying, well, clear, as
Don't we
clear as
have
they
some
can be.
angled parking downtown? Or am I wrong?
Well,
Some,
it's true, we have it, and if you like looking at the back of cars and as you drive down the street, I guess it's fine, but
I think that really kind of is my question.
architecturally,
Do you want
they
to,
were, I think they were going for something in this area, and I think parallel parking was more compatible with what they were going for. That's my impression.
It says, it says, the document says it without outright saying it shall be only parallel parking, but it does suggest and show that it's all to be parallel parking, especially within that core, those core block areas.
Right. Of course,
Because that's where the new streets are going to come.
if you have adequate off-street parking, hopefully, then you won't have to concern yourself so much with cramming as many cars on the street as possible.
That parking lot design there, that developer was going to give up that space?
Well, that's, hopefully the village has the leverage to do that through this document.
Have it not just in the village, but like in Olmsted Village, they have angled parking. That little retail area that's to the, whatever direction that is, north. But I can go with none.
I was just thinking under the section for parking where it says parking parallel, we probably should be more specific about that is the expectation. I mean, literally say it in the paragraph, that the expectation is for parallel
I think
parking.
that would be wise.
question that we do not want to have any sort of minimum standards for that include angled parking at all in this document? Is that really the question that we're having? I mean, what would be the difficulty if we had had the minimum standards set in the document for angled parking? Because we have different types of parking now through the village, and I think when we think holistically about parking struggles for the village, I mean, it could come up. I mean, we're already talking about how some of our plans are not implementable in certain areas and throughout the whole street, or certain areas of yes and no. Would it really hurt having the standard?
We do.
You do have the standard?
We have
Okay.
a standard.
It just doesn't say it in
It's not in
this.
this document. It's in the engineering standards and specifications manual.
So, and then, of course, this is,
You know, my point wasn't really for the attractiveness or the lack of attractiveness of angled parking or parallel parking. It was, as we look at a future document, let's plan for increased parking that will be specific towards events or times a day, times of the week. So,
And-
you know, that, there's a lot of ways to do it. You know, I think we just need to look at, as we look at the total concept, you know, there will be times that there's going to be a higher density of vehicles. And if you
Turnover
don't
rates
plan-
will change.
Yeah, if you don't plan for it, then people are going to park. They're going to park in yards and driveways and every other place. You know, as Jack said, everybody's got an F-150, they'll just pull right up on the curb.
Is
You
there
know,
a section on
so-
light rail in here to accommodate that?
And if you think of the areas where we experience issues with our parking, where is the off-street parking provided in those areas? There are none.
That's really is the issue, isn't it?
That is. There was no parking
Even if it's
requirement.
close by, people tend to feel that they're privileged enough that they should be able to park right in front of wherever their destination is.
But that is a good point. I mean, you know, off-street parking should be provided based on the size and the type of use of the building or the structure. And then this is just going to be an additional requirement or additional help to alleviate any of those problems. And yes, in areas where we're probably showing a more public amenity, there's going to be periods where there's, you know, during events or what have you, there's going to be a higher volume, and then the other 98% of the time, it's going to be open space, you know, just not used.
I mean, the village moved one of their monthly events to a different location. Was that because of parking?
it was a lot of reasons. I don't think parking was
Okay.
the larger consideration, but it could help and alleviate some congestion.
Just to kind of talk through this a little bit, and to Kathy's point, Kathy, is your point, just for clarity, that the verbiage could kind of be made, whereas when we talk about parking, the preference is parallel parking and kind of push people towards that,
Right.
is that what you're,
That's what because I think, I mean, it talks about parallel parking, it shows parallel parking, but it never actually says what you're supposed to do with parallel parking.
Okay.
So I think it's good to actually put the statement in that that's what you expect. But then when I look at streets on the other side of the coin, those streets are public streets, predominantly public dollars, and so that may very well influence the decisions that council needs to make about how they design their parking. And I think until you get a parking plan done, which addresses some of the things that you have raised, you know, what time of day, where should it be, how much do you need, you know, it makes it kind of tough. You don't want to necessarily say no angled parking, because council and the village may find itself at a point in time where they need to do angled parking, maybe at least in some places. So, but I think if you put it in that it's the preferred option, then that kind of drives everybody down that path.
okay? And that kind of solves Jack's point to that, and then as well as it doesn't necessarily say none, we don't even bring up angled parking, but it never says you couldn't, and it's a decision that would need to be made.
And
probably by council
and with
at
the
that point.
approach that we're looking at taking to implement these requirements, it's going to give council that ability at their discretion to decide what type of parking they want based on what type of situation there is. And then, again, we do have standards that you know, we could fall back on that would have to be met.
And those standards do not necessarily have to be in this form-based code document. Okay, all right, for those to just be there. I mean,
Well, the street design will preclude or allow for that facility. I mean, if it's a narrow street with a lot of sidewalk, without changing things, that precludes angled parking.
And you don't have to have one or the other, you can have a mix, depending upon what buildings are there and how you want, you know, your line of sight to be portrayed, so.
Comment not on parking. May not be the place to talk about stormwater and, you know, curb inlets, that kind of thing. But it does seem like if we're going, you know, facade to facade, then maybe at least a reference to, at this point, I guess it's the engineering standards manual, but the village is working on a stormwater master plan that, you know, looking at the images of this, it all is flat in the pictures, but in real life, it won't be like that. So consideration to how that needs to be included, designed with respect to, it's got to fit into the village's greater stormwater system, at least plan. I mean, there's not anything in this area right now, so I don't know if it needs, where it needs to tie in, but just maybe that's a comment. I don't know where it fits in here. Site design doesn't seem the place. Street types, I mean, seems like it might be it because normally that's what you're draining, so.
There will be some storm utility installed with the streets. Right?
Are you, you know, if you're tying in roof drains, you know, or do they just dump on the front? And what consideration should be given to that? Where'd that go?
It's a good point, but yeah, I might have to take some extra thought about where should that be mentioned. I don't know if it's in introduction, you know, if it's more overarching.
I think that'll help those who come after us, because, you know, we get every contractor in here, and he provides you all kind of reasons for every excuse you can make up on why it's better to have like the asphalt angled curb versus the curb and gutter, you know, and I think we all really know the difference. It's the reason why they don't want to do it is the expense, you know, so certainly I would mandate that, you know, and it goes back to what Matt said, and, you know, it's just going to assist with the stormwater management.
Plan?
Yeah, I think Matt's right, particularly in the core area, because there's significant difference between the core area of the regulating plan and the areas down Rattlesnake, for example. in one area, curb and gutter and the active stormwater management may be necessary, whereas although there's not a lot, in some of the residential areas, swales may work just fine.
Yeah, where you have active frontage, you may not want to allow, downspouts to just discharge onto the sidewalk. You may want to explicitly have those discharging on the back side of the building, and maybe that's where you have your stormwater. I mean, there's a line there where it's the designer preference and the village requirement, but typically in streetscapes, as they're being designed new,
Correct things.
you want all that tied in, if you can handle the flow.
I see no logical place in here other than street design where, a couple paragraphs like that they would fit there nicely.
I think it should be in, if it's not already in there, it needs to be in there.
To the street, so if you have no,
Every time we've seen a development, they all try to take the cheapest way out on curbs, which is going to be problematic for the homeowners.
Water management and
Yeah.
traffic.
Yeah.
Guys, just
Well,
for,
the conversation here was that, maybe I'm paraphrasing, is that some discussion of stormwater management relative to this plan would be appropriate in the document.
Would have to place it somewhere in general
street
purpose
design.
or something,
Street
maybe just
design is a
right
good
in the
place to
beginning.
start.
I mean, again, because we're not going to be able to get to a level of,
No, it's not an engineering standard, it's a general expectation.
we hope you take into consideration where your runoff's going to go.
No, I think yeah, I mean, that's going to tie into it, but I think we're talking more of the curb and gutter approach for the streets as starting there. Just because every time that, development comes here, it's, probably the less costly, but the least practical.
In case you didn't have anything else to do, you had those.
Then, and that waiver would, the authority to, with our current standard to grant that waiver rests with village council.
But this is a guidance document. To some extent, it's going to be a guidance document. And so to the extent that there's some mention of it, it may be useful.
There's no harm in putting something in the document, yes.
Well, yeah, let's hope someone picks this up, hey, I'm going to do development in, Village Place. And they look at this and say, okay, how much of this can I do, within my budget, my design, versus how much can I get wavered, that I don't want to do? If not, we might as well stop now and shred these ones and see what refund we can get.
And to just, as we move forward from this discussion, keep in mind that again, that with this work, we're talking about two very specific portions of the village's jurisdiction. Whereas we're moving into the completion and an ultimate recommendation on another project, the Stormwater Master Plan, which is hoping to address that, again, village-wide. So that's going to be, whatever recommendation comes to that and whatever's adopted by village council is going to be something that's going to apply universally throughout the village. So hopefully, because that's been such a topic of concern and comment for the past few years, again, dealing with a built environment that had little to zero standards that had to be met, whether it be a type of curb or not. Now we're having to deal with those issues 30, 40 years later. So again, hopefully that's going to be largely addressed village-wide, but we'll try to find where we think is a good spot to lay something in there that the consideration be made,
Yeah, I
greater
guess-
consideration made.
Well, right now, the language would be even more vague because you don't have a plan.
know what
so
it is.
it's in, as a part of the development review process. But I'm assuming, when the plan is approved, then there's not just going to be changes to this needed, but across other ordinances and design
Yeah,
standards.
so
That's expected.
Yeah, and there again, there's some of that expectation too, that, there's going to be special allowances, more restrictions, more specifics to development in these areas through this process and through this document. But then there's still going to be some of those overarching, village-wide requirements that are going to have to apply no matter what you're doing. But again, a very general statement can be placed because the engineering standards, the PDO, they're going to change, they're going to be amended. New adoptions, or new regulations will be placed in there, so we can put a general statement somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, you can put something in here as simple as, stormwater management is important in this plan, and it should conform and be consistent with any master plan and/or other engineering standards for the village. Something as simple as
I
that.
write that down.
Yeah.
Type that up and send it.
I was going to say, there's some verbiage, I'm sure, that's out there that would relate that to the form-based codes in some general point or aspect, I would imagine. It's more of a question more than that.
Well, I
would
mean,
you
I think
imagine?
when you look at the areas that we're talking about, a lot of small lot development, we're talking about a high percentage of impervious coverage, and so what you really want to do is, drive people towards, better green design on how they manage stormwater on the site, and then you still have to incorporate it into the overall system, and how it discharges to the system. So I think the question is, if you want green roofs, then you have to do something to make that happen, for example. But with the intensity that we would expect with the stormwater management issues out of an area that's more dense like this, it's not going to be the standard you would expect to see in a large lot subdivision.
Another just visual comment on these pages. So I was trying to find the older version of this that I have, but I didn't. But I liked that, maybe it was like this before, but the picture is now lined up with the dimensions. I feel like before, maybe it wasn't, and I just may not be remembering it correctly, but it's clear, the graphic. But I was wondering on the section cut at the bottom, if that could be maybe a little clearer.
Page are you on here?
24 and 25, it's on every page with the
Right,
section view.
the cross-section and the street
Just that,
picture.
that line by itself is, I like to see a little more, like indicating this is that view, arrows or a label or something. It's just a suggestion. It's more preference. And then I just want to ask about the right-of-way. I think when we talked about this before, when we look at those wide sidewalks, recognizing that the pedestrian zone and the building zone are distinct, but when you look at it, there's no visual distinction because the place for pedestrians in the building zone is all in the same area. And I can't remember, did we talk about the need for like a ownership? I mean, the building owner is responsible to the right-of-way line, but in terms of that sidewalk, there's no place where that really stops until you get to the vegetative line or the tree zone.
Well, the building zone would be outside of the right-of-way, right? Wouldn't the right-of-way be from pedestrian zone to pedestrian zone?
Yeah, right. So I guess my question is like in terms of the sidewalk or that entire hardscaped area.
So a delineation,
Yeah, I mean, how do you
a
determine
visual
that?
delineation.
I mean, and this may be a common thing in downtown streetscapes where they have it, it's clear, like if you own this building, you're not responsible for, the sidewalk in front of your building, you're only responsible for the facade, so it may not be an issue, I'm just not sure.
So you're referencing more this diagram here.
That's right.
Right, yeah, so so half of this area conceivably is supposed to be the pedestrian zone, and the other half could be some hardscape that's within the building zone.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, if you, like, and then when you scroll up, you can see where that, the leader line drops down, right there, and it's,
Right, yeah.
Past the tree
'cause
line.
if you look at the build-to line, the build-to line is not, it's behind the sidewalk. It does not include the sidewalk.
yeah, so how do you handle that? Or what's the expectation for a property owner?
I mean, they could, I guess conceivably, just by the conceptual diagram there, that they have up to 10 feet where they could do hardscape, choose not to do hardscape.
Well, like maintenance, is the village responsible for, building to building, or?
No, because, again, I don't think that, even though it may be inviting and open to the public, it's not public property. But the public can use it and moving around, but I know we had those situations downtown where some of the area is within the village right of way, and then in some areas, the right of way is very narrow, and other areas, in the area outside of that, there may be a bench out front of a restaurant, for example, thinking they're around on Market Square. The village obviously owns and maintains what's in the right of way. I'm not aware of any agreement that we take care of the area that's on the private property side.
So, I mean, that's a great example. So on like brick sidewalk, if something needs to be repaired and it's up against a building, it's up against Dugan's, who's responsible for that?
Private property owner.
They do it.
That's a good point. I'm glad you had that cup of coffee, Matt. But, has anyone looked at the additional public space and what the maintenance cost over the years is going to be? Just replacing all the trees, I mean, that's not going to be a private owner's responsibility. It's a lot more space that has to be maintained with a lot more expensive items there.
That'd be the same with any development in any streets, any sidewalks that go in or eventually that's why we have standards and put warranties in place. I don't know that that's something that this board is within their purview.
Yeah, certainly not within the purview of this board, correct, but just looking at the design, I mean, it's going to be more expensive to, keep the desired design or standard.
But then again, that's the question for the community. Do we want to live with this standard and pay for this standard, or are we okay with a lesser standard?
Point. Hey, so with the picture, kind of step back a point a second. So the picture right here of Market Square, is that a good example of what Matt's concern is, where right up against that building may not be public?
Where is that delineation, I think, is the question, and therefore whose responsibility is it?
Right.
But
And that may not fit into this code, but.
I was also going to mention, future, remodeling of the building, something that the tenant may want to do a little bit different. Well, I mean,
we're kind of, if you recollect some of the communications I've sent out the past couple of weeks, some of this is conceptual, some of this is actual hard design, so we got to make sure that we try to stay on task as best we can. For this piece, so we can move on, again, we've kind of run out of some of our abilities to adjust some of the photos and diagrams in here. But, I mean, a clear depiction of showing here's pedestrian zone, here's pedestrian zone, here's pedestrian zone, here's pedestrian zone. Same on the other sides. I mean, we could do that.
Dotted line down
Yeah,
there.
we could see if I will say unless directed otherwise, that's not what I would probably ask staff to spend a lot of time working on with the document.
Fair enough.
I'll just throw this out
Good,
about
good
the,
point, and things that we should
I'm
talk
comfortable
about.
with that, yeah.
about the trees and Paul's concern. The village government is very responsible. But I happen to come from a city that was not responsible. So, the trees died, even if they were, they died. And it wasn't a top priority of government dollars to do that. And unfortunately, it happened in many low-income areas. But we came up with, on new developments, that we had a fund that the developer had to contribute to that would go, concerning street trees, that would go directly back to their maintenance and replacement. It's just something to think
So,
about.
and that's a good point. There are programs that we could consider
have
You
a
just don't know
memorial-
who's
you can
going to
have a
be in
memorial
charge of
tree
what, you
program
know?
In this community.
I always thought it was a good idea.
What's that, Bruce? Go ahead and speak in. I'd like to hear. Well, I missed it.
I said you could establish a memorial tree program where people, contribute, buy a tree, get a little plaque.
So I'm loving the segues we've gotten today, so that can take us right into the next section, which is landscaping.
Welcome.
So my question on landscaping and looking
I
at
can't
my
believe you're going to comment on landscaping.
old notes, just one, is, we talked about having a landscape consultant review sizing and tree selections, and to make sure that it was consistent with the village planting guide. Is
I
that something?
love that you have notes from those previous discussions that you're reading from. You see how serious he's taking his job.
So is that reasonable to do probably not between now and,
This section has been reviewed by some members of the beautification committee as to whether or not the planting guide appears appropriate and similar to, or the same as appears elsewhere in the village, and they said it does.
Yeah, I think the planting guide here blows our current guide
It is.
out of the water, yes. This is,
so it's maybe sets a new standard? Yeah. okay.
yeah, well, as sensible as landscaping can get. Can you tell I've had to deal with some situations with landscaping before?
We did think that, I mean, the new language may provide a better opportunity to just go right into the PDO for everybody.
Yep, yep, okay.
It is,
That's great.
it is far and above what we currently have, in a very positive way. More native species, it's more conducive to our soils, it's,
Okay, great.
oh boy. That means we have to go to the architectural standards next, if we're done with landscaping.
Well, I wanted to kind of make a comment, I guess, pertaining to, one second, I'm sorry. I'm good. We can. I think.
All right, who wants to start us off with the architectural design?
Okay.
Jack, do you have any points in your,
Yeah, I think I picked out, to me at least, three things that need to be talked about. One is flat roofs. The other is the type of facade, whether stone or artificial stone or something like that is appropriate. And I think I also mentioned something about porches, the returns on,
I'll just take the low-hanging fruit on that. We had changed a lot of the document, and we missed one about the porch return. The porch return should be whatever the width of that porch is, and not two architectural pieces, whatever that width is. We'll make that change.
good.
So yeah, flat roofs, that's actually a topic that I know Darren, Kathy, and I talked at nauseum for several Friday afternoons, which was punishment enough that we were discussing that on a late Friday afternoon.
I know, it's like religion and politics.
Yeah, it was tough. Yeah, I tend to agree that I don't think, one, it's not preferred, and I think the document says it without maybe clearly saying that. It's just on certain areas, if you're going to have an amenity area or where there's a service area, mechanical equipment. And this prompted us to do a little research. If you go down to the village center, you may be shocked to find that some of those are faux facades on the front.
I know they are, yeah.
When you wouldn't know it. So it can be done tastefully. But maybe a minimum, or a maximum area could be devoted to flat roofs just for those reasons.
And I think I tried to recognize that commercial can be can be different. from
Residential,
residential.
I agree with you. I don't think that, especially the single-family attached and detached, and that wouldn't fly, because again, this area is largely an historic district. That would not,
Close to it in
Yep.
proximity, right?
that would not fly.
You were still good with a commercial, okay.
So stone, let's talk about stone.
Facade, stone, facade, you know what
Yep,
I'm.
the
going
veneer,
with
yep.
there. Back to a little bit of HPC days, yep.
Remember those very, very vividly, Jack. So here we are, and this is throughout some of the areas, but, exterior walls shall be stone, cast stone, precast concrete, architectural brick, or block, I'm sorry, brick, wood clapboard, or cementitious siding. So how does a group in large feel about stone?
My initial thoughts are, I don't see where, the way today that a lot of those materials are used, and a lot of the materials that could be purchased for use and how they're used in many new construction design, I don't see where they fit into maybe consistency of a look between Village Place with the core downtown area. Very nice looking product, but I'm trying to figure out in what way could it be used that would be consistent in nature with the overall look of what we're trying to achieve in the form-based code. So that's where I'm struggling, and maybe I need a little help there, because everything that I'm envisioning in, what stone products that I've seen, they don't fit. And it's much more of a contemporary nature that's being used today in the design. And when we use the word urban, and then we come in with some contemporary design, I just feel it kind of may work against a little bit. And I could be wrong, but I think that's my initial feeling.
I think Jeremy's right. And also, I mean, one of the overriding objectives is to make this an extension of the current core village. And to the extent that it can be similar, congruous, that would be appropriate. And stone tends to be a different material that's, especially the facing stone, if you will, is kind of a more modern technique. Doesn't seem to be the same as the village.
I mean, we can always talk about, stone that would typically be used residentially and that type of thing, and whether or not that would look good, but I'm thinking more on the commercial aspect of things in the application, and I just don't see where that flows with our village look today. I mean, that's my thoughts.
What is permitted currently in the historic district with respect to stone veneer? Because I've seen properties that are being built or that
For the
have,
commercial properties in the historic district, they can use brick, wood, clapboard. What was the other one?
but residential is permitted.
Shake.
Residential is permitted to use that stone?
Well, it's not encouraged, I
I
would
think,
say.
I think it's an option, but
It is
but you got to
permitted.
make a
It's
case,
essentially permitted presently.
maybe.
Well, it's a
Cherokee
subjective,
Road.
it's a subjective judgment is whether it's congruous. So it gets tricky very quickly. No absolute, but in this case, particularly with the core area, which we want to be an extension of the village, the center city, I think we should be a little bit more careful as far as what we specify.
Collective nod and agreement?
Yep, I think a prudent approach with stone's very, very important. I do. And so even if we talk about the less contemporary items that are out there and being used, they still don't flow. I mean, even if we're trying to get to a more traditional look in the stone items, they still don't flow. I mean, it could look beautiful, but I'm just trying to find a way in my head where it would even flow at all. That's my
We don't
struggle.
want it to look like a modern office park.
Right. So,
Pretty straightforward.
probably see that a lot of that. I mean, am I wrong? You know, whenever I say I just agree, I don't sound as smart as he.
No. Don't put yourself down.
Let's go check it out.
Okay, so we talked about the lighting. I'm seeing it here, but I was thinking there was also a lighting section from before, but I just can't find my notes on it after you made that nice comment.
Yeah, I believe it was the previous section 3.
Okay. But we talked about, what we're showing here is this not backlit signs. This is what we want. I think this is what we had talked about, and we're consistent in that? Or are we allowing backlit? Does anybody remember from that discussion?
Oh, I remember the discussion.
Yes, I do, because I joked, how many times was Darren able to get backlit into one meeting, and it was like 102? We don't address that currently
Okay.
in the code. I can see how it could be beneficial and done tastefully, but I can also see how it could cause some issues.
Kind of again goes along with that whole contemporary design that do we have any backlit signs currently in our village? I mean, I don't believe we do. Could think of some, but
I think some of it looks good. I mean, it does, contemporary, means one thing to me. I wouldn't say some of it's contemporary. I think some of it looks kind of,
Tasteful.
accents the historic value of it.
sure,
but,
yeah.
Yeah.
I think if it's done and it's done muted, and it's done to a certain area, then we don't even speak to backlighting now. Again, it's either internally illuminated or externally illuminated signs. And depending on where you're located, you can be one or the other. And if it's externally illuminated, then it's restrictive to where the external light is and how it's directed. Internally, again, we're going to have our other signage regulations control, which we're very restrictive in the village for signage as far as type, number, and area. And again, it's pretty well confined to just the non-residential districts where you can have an internally illuminated sign. So no backlighting yet to speak of. So if we look at maybe allowing it potentially, but keeping it muted, again, that's a bit subjective, a bright.
Well, I think, I missed that it was in here like that. It says internally illuminated exterior signage is prohibited. So, is that what we're saying? We all,
That seems to make better sense in Village Place, and you mean, maybe when you look at Pinehurst South, you might want to rethink it a little bit down there, but
yeah,
For here,
it
it seems to
separately
be-
says awnings shall not be backlit under the awnings description, but in terms of the, building signage.
Question also is there a way to regulate it or to verbalize it to talk about it being muted? I mean, because I see some of these internally lit signs that are pretty bright.
Well, and I'm thinking now that part of our discussion before was it was kind of inconsistent in the previous version, and so this seems to be more consistent. It's all.
Whether
it
it's
all
internal
speaks
lit or
to-
backlit?
Yeah, it's not,
Okay.
there's no internal, it's got to be lit externally with, decorative visible light sources. So that, I think that has been updated.
Signs, it's not internally lit. The colors aren't glowing. There's a shade or a cast behind it that accents it, I think, right?
Yeah, I guess it depends on, what's the sign?
I guess what we don't want to go towards is everybody's got, when you look at page 58, everybody has the same lit sign, you know what I mean? Then it's uniform, too uniform, providing enough options.
Was that your segue into the signage?
That was, see how we did that?
MS3, that's pretty nice.
We more than segued, I think.
We just,
You guys rehearsed this earlier.
A little lost. What's the conclusion and/or result of that?
whether we have one.
I like it
But-
as is.
Just leave it prohibited.
Reminded of how we got there.
And again, I think it was after we got tired of discussing it, we just decided just to not allow it.
A little bit of that, yeah.
I mean, and two, maybe the time's not now, just because we don't have that much time.
Yep.
But since there are options for tasteful backlighting, you know, that just gives us an ability to kind of regroup outside of this discussion and
And there's nothing that restricts you, right now? I mean, it's not restricted, is it? I mean,
Well, this does.
does, yeah,
restrict it.
it prohibits it.
okay, the difference between backlighting and then
Oh, well,
internal lighting, I mean,
I guess in the industry, is it understood that internal lighting is backlit? So,
okay.
yeah. Kathy says that.
Kathy says it's
If you
on.
only have internal or externally illuminated in your current regulations as definition, I think you have to apply it to be internally illuminated.
Yep.
Right, we did kind of jump through this. Was there anything else on the architectural standards that we want to discuss as a group?
The only thing I mentioned, my last point on the privacy fences that are allowed to extend forward of the primary structure. I'm not a big fan of that.
It's not allowed anyway. We'll fix that.
It creates compounds, you know.
It's not allowed anyway. It wouldn't be allowed. In the historic district, wouldn't be allowed for the PDO.
It doesn't look friendly. Okay. So can I backtrack one to the previous discussion about sign types and standards? About the implication in this document was that Village Place will be identified as a separate location within the Village of Pinehurst. You know, even with its own, even mentions Village Place logo. I thought we were going to try to make it not, you didn't leave the center of the village and go to Village Place. It was a continuation, so I think that is counter to that theory.
If there's anything left in here that speaks to, hey, we're designating a new logo and a new,
It's in that section, I pointed it out there. That could be stricken or something like that. Okay, looks good.
change in the signage examples in there. Now, Darren worked really hard on that.
Yeah, they're all local.
They're all local, yeah.
But they also show that consistency, that what you're trying to get at is that signage in this area, whatever it is just that it be consistent with the signage, the neighboring signage in there, so. The fact that he was able to find a lot of examples that were some form of white or very off-white colored, he did a good job for.
Job, Darren.
Okay, well,
I think you're close. And you may be closer than you think.
okay, so, I mean, this is helpful. We've got some changes that we can easily make and try to incorporate them as soon as we can and get a revised copy distributed back out for the board so Matt can check his notes. And so I can check Matt's notes. I might need a copy of your notes.
Yeah, you bet.
So next steps is pertaining to this. Do one more review before we get to the public hearing, or the next one would be the public hearing when we readdress the form-based codes for Village Place.
So my hope now is going forward, our next meeting, which we expect to be on the 15th.
Yep.
What we will be, hopefully by then, we'll have a revised set. We don't have to necessarily go through section by section, hopefully, with that. But with that, maybe we'll be at the point where we can share a draft memo. I would call it a justification, but maybe a reasoning for the approach that we're going to take to implement the regulatory provisions of this. So you guys can start to see the vision and how we're going to lay it out. Maybe even at that point, we'll have some draft provisions of the PDO that will be able to show you how we're going to weave the process for development approval, as well as what standards that we've looked at will be implemented into the PDO. The map itself is pretty much looking at this, just a regulating plan with a boundary, because it's going to be an overlay. Both areas will be a new overlay. And within that overlay, they're going to be the little sub-districts, if you will, the blocks. And so hopefully just to get you guys understanding what those text and map amendments are going to look like, that we're going to have a public hearing on April 6th. And then we're going to start back on Pinehurst South. The next step with Pinehurst South is going to be going through the use table, since we've agreed on the regulating plan, just like we did with Village Place. Hopefully, with the Pinehurst South, we're not going to maybe get bogged down in some of the discussions like, the veterinary offices, or just because, again, it's a totally different vision in that area, and considering that a good chunk of that planning area on the west side of Highway 5 is going to be devoted to the residential, and then some on the south side of the eastern portion of Pinehurst South. And then so it's really going to be that core area, which is what we consider the Pinehurst South, the Blake development, and then the other large portion there south of Blake Boulevard.
Where is the use table for Village Place?
I believe that was distributed to you guys back
Yeah,
in
it was.
January.
I'm sure I have it
Yeah.
very near in my files somewhere.
That and the dimensional standards. So those are going to be woven into the PDO. So,
Yeah, that's
because the one thing we can't do is we can't condition, we got to have a base. Since we're doing a hybrid form-based code and we have building types that we're regulating by, or uses, we're going to have a use table that's going to be set forth the allowances. Even with the conditional zoning, you can't condition uses into an area that's not already permitted. And the other basis is going to be those dimensional criteria or standards, which can be varied or further restricted through the conditional zoning process. But once an approval comes from that, whatever that overall density is, it will not be allowed to be increased from that approval. So those are two things, that the density and the uses are going to have to be fairly well set and established before that conditional zoning approach has to come through.
So you recommend we, once again, review the use table and the dimensional standard, and we have those?
Yep, you'll have them, but then you'll see how they're potentially going to be seated in the PDO. Because it's going to be something, it's going to be different than how we've shared it with, I mean, you think of our table 8.5 now, because that's what we've all seen, that's what we've all lived by. Okay, well, now we're going to have a separate use table, so we don't have a use table that's 2 miles wide, right? Because we got several blocks that we're adding on to, under a column of Village Place form-based district and Pinehurst South form-based district. It's just, our table is just going to be a mess if we do that. So what we're going to do is we're basically going to have a reference in the PDO. Here's your new overlay. Here's your other new overlay. And for the uses and for the dimensional criteria, you go to this table. Don't go to this table. Don't go to 8.5 where you've been living since 1994. You're going to go here. And then the hope is, once we finally get our comprehensive update to the PDO, we're going to hopefully be able to fix and rework and organize that document, because frankly, it needs it. And that way you can kind of condense, okay, if you're in this district, this is where you go. Start to finish, this is everything you need to know if you're developing anything in this district. Because now we don't necessarily all live by print anymore. The fear before has been that, well, then you do that, you create a document that's in a binder this thick. Well, now if we got our digital file, or in a searchable file, or an HTML file that we can just go to with hyperlinks and all, you can just click R10. Okay, I go here, I got everything I need to know about R10. So we're going to let someone else fix the mess that we create.
Comprehensive approach to the PDO, that's going to be pretty lengthy in time, right? I mean, that's really where a lot more time is going to be needed specifically from staff and you, and then some from us. Any idea? I mean, we talking about years? We talking?
Well, we'll know a little bit more as we're.
Don't
going-
get- yeah.
We're going through the strategic planning process, or beginning that now. Obviously, that's been something we planned and budgeted for the past 2, maybe 3 fiscal years, and we're still at draft RFQ.
No RFP.
Oh, we have gotten RFP, okay.
Oh.
So,
Well, the point I was going to make is really just for that reason is one of the biggest reasons that the conditional zoning approach is really needed, I think, to implement the form-based codes. Am I reading that incorrectly?
it's really, well, it's kind of, it's several approaches. One, speed, time.
Yeah.
It gets us in there, but it protects that vision, because it's going to create that legislative
Allows us
process.
to implement the vision.
Exactly.
Okay.
And, you're still going to be a guide. So when someone wants to come and develop, here's your guide. So you have your comprehensive plan, then you're going to have the small area plan with the form-based code kicker that says, this is what we want to see happen here. So if you don't want to meet that, if it's not related to uses or too much of an increase in density, then you better come with some examples. It's also going to require someone who's truly interested in developing there. They're going to have to put forth a decent expenditure of time, effort, and money to have some sort of plan develop, a general concept plan, elevations, renderings, where this group, staff, village council, the public, all have a greater understanding of what eventually is going to be permitted in that area. And then that gives them ability to go to the next step, if approved, for the detailed construction drawings, and then it'll be delegated to the staff technical review committee to work out the details with the developer. But yes, the other part of that, Jeremy, is outside of historic districts, architectural design requirements for structures that are subject to the 1 and 2 family code, townhomes, single family. We really can't require any level of design requirements. So if we want high-quality design and development, then that is a tool that we can use. Because we won't have to say yes. We won't have to agree to it if they won't consent to it.
Well, and it speaks volume to really, staff's intent to produce a very high-quality product, an implementable product, and really that speaks to the timeline that was needed for this whole, the whole thing that we're in. And the conditional zoning approach allows us to, like you said, implement it, so.
And knowing that you guys will have an opportunity to provide a recommendation, village council will have discretion in making their decision. Again, someone's going to have, there's going to have to be a buy-in, a complete buy-in on all sides, the public, the village council, developer, and then staff's going to help hold accountability. The other thing about the timing is on the back end. What this does is it gives us as staff the time to evaluate what's working, what's not working, what standards that we need, like just like last week, we brought to you guys because something we've evaluated with our retaining wall section, for example. Things are going to change. We're going to be able to evaluate that, but it gives us as staff the time, which none of us have enough of, but so it gives us an opportunity to really see how this is going to work, because it is new. It is a big leap from anything that we've done.
If we rush through the implementation, if we rush through, the PDO, any sort of conflicts in the PDO and the rewrite, then we could obviously be cutting some of our legs off to what we're trying to achieve, and gives us the opportunity to, like you said, find problems and let things come up and solve them.
And there may be. I mean, the buffer development ordinance, I know Jeremy, you mentioned that earlier. Look at how many versions of that did we go through before, and how long of a process did that take, There's always, when you implement new standards, new zoning requirements, you're going to need to adjust after you've had some real life experience. I know Louise should be breaking her neck, nodding her head so hard over there, because we're not going to be able to find every possible situation, even though we can think about it and come up with all kind of scenarios. We need real world application, and then we can bring back what we've evaluated and changes.
And every community is a little bit different, so. brings in hours. So from a board standpoint, we should continue, I guess, where our attention is today, maybe prepare for kind of a overall comprehensive look on the 15th of this thing, and maybe get some sort of, some sort of approach to this thing from staff. Again, we're not going section through section altogether. Maybe some of the changes that you've taken from us, maybe some of that discussion as well as any other ones that come together, and then we'll be ready to discuss council or this form-based code version, right?
And hopefully take that up with a formal action on the 30th.
I think Jack said the point earlier. I think we're closer than you even think. Yeah, we have detailed this thing
You've worked.
with you. Yeah.
You have worked, and we appreciate that. One thing about the 15th, again, thanks to those who prepared who gave a response to the poll. We understand life gets in the way. If for whatever reason we feel like, or you feel like you might not be able to make any of the dates that you've told us you can, just as much heads up as you can, just so we know that we can have or not have a quorum, so we can get out that notification that we need to. On the 15th as well, Jeremy, is that one you're,
So to that point, so, my schedule's changed where now the 15th, the 16th, and more, 90% chance on the 21st as well. Or is it the 23rd? The next meeting, I should not be able to make.
and I may also now have had something that has come up where I may have to hand over to another staff to kind of finish the discussion.
Okay.
It's going to kind of be a last minute. I might not know, got a leadway of about an hour and a half of somewhere I've got to go, and got to know if my wife's going to be able to take care of that situation or not. So all the more better that we've got as far as we did today.
Can you remind us, I don't know that I wrote down where, that I said, I don't think I told you I was going to be here on the 15th, but I just want to make sure you don't have me on your list.
Yeah, how are we doing for the 15th?
I have 5 on this poll. Let's see. Matt has said I will be at every single meeting, faithful attendance. First one in, last one out. No, you did
Paul wrote
not.
that, didn't he?
Yep.
We don't have you down for the 15th. We do have Paul, we have David, we have Jules, Jack, and Sonia. So if that holds, that's 5.
That's Wednesday, the 15th, right?
Right?
Okay there?
At 4.
There you go.
Okay.
Forget that, you don't need that.
On the 16th.
Correct.
And then on the 16th, you originally said start at 2.
Yeah, I think there were 2 dates that it looked like folks were able to make a
If you
2
can do it,
PM.
that'd be fine.
And that was one of our better attendance. We have 7 folks responded that they could be there for that one. Now, Jeremy, we might have to scratch you on that one though, right?
Yeah, I think
Well, you
initially.
put tentative. So you had put tentative. in
I'm
there.
okay on the 15, 16, and 21 for Jeremy.
Yeah.
Okay.
I've discussed it with Jack before this meeting, and the 21st looks, it could change, but right now, count me out. And then,
And hopefully by then, by the time we get into the 16th and the 21st, we're at the point where we're kind of picking back up on the work in the Pinehurst South area. Hopefully, we've gotten the Village Place stuff done. You guys have an opportunity to see how we're trying to get the PDO to work, or get this implemented in through the PDO framework, with knowing that you're still going to have a public hearing on that on the 6th. The 30th, the 29th and the 30th are those last 2. What I want to make sure is with those last 2 that we take the ability to be together and still talk through the Pinehurst South form-based code wherever we need to. But also, if there's any loose ends that need to be tied up for those upcoming 2 public hearings, again, everything is setting up for a public hearing on the 30th with a recommendation and a public hearing on the 6th with a recommendation. And then if all goes well, maybe you guys can take May off. I won't be able to. Okay?
we've covered the next 2 points on our agenda tonight, which was to point out that we have a meeting on the 3:15. What else, do you, staff members need from us as a board tonight?
Just know that I mean, we appreciate the effort, and we know that this is a lot to ask. And if we had more time, and we haven't been in a moratorium for 25 months, maybe things would be a little different, but, so, thank you.
Okay, with that, unless anything else, we can adjourn this thing.
Yeah, I move to adjourn the special meeting.
We have a motion on the floor by Jack, second by Louise. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, we are adjourned at 5:40.